I trust you're having a wonderful moment in this space of now. Welcome to Sean's Thoughts. And we're here today at a vacant, we'll call it, train station. Interestingly enough, we have a train that slowly moves all the way from Vancouver out to Mission. It travels along a line of trains that only is used to carry workers to Vancouver Monday through Friday. And the remaining portion of the time, well, they encourage us to, get in our cars and get on the number one highway and get stuck in traffic. But yet, on those days where efficiency is most important, they funnel workers to and from on small amounts of time in the early mornings and after, cutoff time. And so on this day of Saturday, actually, this train station remains vacant, occasionally having, of course, those shipping trains come by, and perhaps we'll see one of them today. And so I've decided to utilize this beautiful, beautiful frame for my moving portrait, perhaps. The wonderful blue in the sky and, even the wet tile and the empty train station. It's truly, truly a remarkable space to look in. First of all, I want to address the apology that I have, and that's because I had planned to put up this new podcast last night, actually yesterday morning as well. And yet I kept feeling called to pull it back, to replace it with something else as I had done yesterday, because I had mentioned prior that I had these four ideas that were, banging at the door, waiting to come out. And one of them ended up being not this particular talk, but the other talk that I did yesterday. So I highly encourage you to go back perhaps and, listen to that audio and that particular one. And I'll put it in here, of course, when I'm guided to. It is called Reframing Human Progress. And that's what it's currently called. Perhaps I'll change the title because, I've come to understand a lot of things about the nature of who we are as Homo sapiens. And, maybe there comes a better title one day. But yet, right now, that's what it'll be called. But regardless, that talk I will put up there because I discovered that was an amazing talk that I had to, express. And I'm fully grateful for having that expression yesterday. And I'm grateful for an amazing talk that I had afterwards because it also allowed me to be in the energy of receiving so that I was able to essentially reframe my own understanding of a very important book that many people around this world covet, whatever they prize. And so today I'm here to share with you my perhaps understanding of an important aspect of my own journey. And I feel as if it is an important part of everyone's journey in a sense because with moving forward into a land of milk and honey, as some would say, yet into a land of harmony and blissfulness. I think there's an important attribute that I have personally experienced and discovered all of my life. And yet, for long points in time, I was unaware of the requirement, perhaps, or, almost the necessity and while this is my thought, of course, it's also my experiences of that thought. So I'm going to step into the frame now. Welcome to Sean's Thoughts. And I'm going to sit here with you. And I trust that even though I'm a little further away now, the microphone is going to pick up my voice perfectly. And this whole entire transmission is protected by the source of all, God. And, you know, my camera is of God, my microphone is of God, I am of God. This entire frame that I'm capturing now today is of God. We are all of God, God's creations, God's children, however you choose to look at it, but yet, not but yet, and yet. I think that there are different reasons, perhaps, why we are all on this landscape, this tapestry, this canvas that we are essentially existing within and on and, above and all of that lovely stuff. And yeah, I wish to share with you my understanding that I've come to with regards to, balance, and balance being that of harmony. You know, Perhaps if we were to live in a world where things were imbalanced, at one point in time, there could be a ton of femininity, for example, or for instance, there could be a ton of masculinity. And we have all lived in different patriarchal or matriarchal societies. And maybe that's a true part of our history, that there have been times where different energies were imbalanced and we lived in a world where, you know, one overrid the other. And that's how I've come to understand it, is that at a time in our history, there was perhaps energies that of even femininity that dominated over masculinity. And, there is always the cycles, the ebbs and the flows of how our energies perhaps were. Like, I once heard this story in a book that I read where it talked about after the fall of Atlantis that the beings that held on to perhaps the flame, that were still connected to, you know, a divine source, that they reigned in a time prior to Egypt where femininity was the revered energy, because those people that, expressed that energy as perhaps women, that they were in a sense powerful, that they were the ones who reigned over, and that their ideas of, or their premonitions of perhaps, or their connection to the divine source allowed them to, you know, be in power. And yet with all power, there's always the ability to corrupt it. And so while we look back and we see our time of, the early last 100 years, where the masculinity has been in power, dominating over the feminine divine, for example, or just overall the feminine energy, that there has been turmoil between not just the sexes, but the actual, men and women, that not the genders, but also the divine and the masculine, the feminine and the masculine divine. These two energies that both hold their own attributes. For example, masculinity perhaps could be seen as, that warrior strength, that ability to stand independent, that ability to remain steadfast even against great opposition and battle forward, not willing to perhaps falter, or, willing to stand within their beliefs, and that ability to even train or to teach or to lead. See, we see leading as like a male strength perhaps, when in fact leading, I believe, is truly a aspect, or an aspect of, you know, a balanced being, to be able to lead within whatever energy they stand in. And yet there are others who would say that, for instance, that the femininity, that their attributes are compassion and love and, an inner strength, versus on the masculine, it would be more of an outer strength, more of a facade holding up that imagery of strength, versus women are, or not women, but the femininity aspect of energy is to have that internal strength and to teach from, a different way rather than in the masculine. So you can see, and I'm not going to go to all over the whole attributes. You all have your own perspectives of this, but yet there is definitely a difference between these two energies. And yet I've come to understand that what perhaps we're looking forward to or moving towards is a balancing of the masculine and a balance of the feminine within the single being, rather than coming to this new time where, many people I've heard believe that, oh, well, the femininity is going to rise again and they're going to lead us. you know, Maybe in the past that was the cycle that we went through, because in a world of cycles that we did fully experience, we went through many of the same stories in our history because we lived in a repeating fashion where there was the rise of the masculinity, followed by the fall of the masculinity into a dark age, and then the rise of the femininity, and then the fall of the femininity into a dark age, and then the rise of the masculine. And, looking at those as opposed to genders, but more so energies, allows us to perhaps see, the light and the dark as it shifts from one to another. And that's all done within the energies, and seeing energy as a balance of masculinity and femininity, and searching for or endeavoring to work towards a balance and harmony of those two energies perhaps is where we are headed now. And you can easily see this in what's even happening now. See, if we look out into our world and we see the rise of femininity, perhaps one can view that as, the feminine divine is returning to their rightful place as what? Leader? As, replacing the masculinity? See, the story that I heard was that after the fall of Atlantis, the beings that had essentially survived that cataclysm, they ended up being guided towards an area of Egypt. And it was this prior to Egypt. It was actually to the Sphinx, the Great Sphinx, that existed, and it was on the outside of the area known of as Atlantis. And that this area housed many, energies overall. And when the people arrived there, the ones who were able to connect with this energy were the feminine part of that species, of those beings that arrived there. And I'm not going to say human or Homo sapien or anything. We'll just go to the words beings, because we truly don't really know what things or beings look like. We can have our own ideas based on fossil records and, abstract ideas within this matrix. But just like the dinosaurs, how we truly don't really know what they looked like or appeared like on the outside, their skins, their scales, and all that stuff. We know how their fossils look like, but we're unaware of what they actually looked like on the outside. So we're going to go with the words beings. And anyways, so the story goes that, and this is derived from the work of Sarah Kosmoff, I believe. I'm not sure the exact last name, but her name's Sarah anyways. Oh, here comes a train. So we're going to let this train go by, and I'm just going to sit here for a moment and do nothing. And yeah, then I'll get to the story in a second. We'll see how much sound this train brings in this microphone right now. Wasn't that just an amazing opportunity to set my camera up and have that beautiful train race by us for those brief moments of no thing? I'll probably turn that into video for my no thing, or maybe more importantly, for my moving portraits, because there's a lot of, key ingredients within that frame that we just saw. If you witnessed and or perhaps observed all of that beautiful graffiti that was on the side of the train. And I highlight that because, those are creative aspects of the Homo sapiens that essentially, they claim to have tagged their art, but they created on the side of a train, and they made that train a lot more beautiful than it could ever have been without it. Often I look at graffiti as, divine art. And I actually did this video previously called Graffiti Under the Bridge, I believe, and I'll pin it up there because I truly do see this idea of graffiti as an expression of inner art, and to the lengths that these artists have went to in the case of this particular bridge of putting graffiti, their tags, their phrases, their words, even sometimes, just scribbles or even stickers in the case of the graffiti underneath the bridge in hope. And it is a unique expression of their inner child or their inner creative being. And I say child simply because, I more understand that children are a greater example of our ability to create. And that when we are children, we are definitely encouraged to, create and color and, just be. And yet, as we move into our pupil stage or our adult stage, we end up having that eroded from us, telling us to stay within the lines and to write and draw as we have been told, and we're essentially programmed to copy a lot more, to memorize as opposed to, discover the answers for ourselves. And yeah, that's kind of a really great example. And having that train come by in this moment of now, and I was just able to breathe and to relax and do no thing and to recognize the true amazing creativity of this planet that we're on, regardless of it's, a deer walking up to me while I was doing a podcast, or ducks swimming by, or even a train coming in at the perfect opportune moment. See, because I wasn't at or in the middle of that particular story, I was just about to tell you more about the story. So that kind of segues perfectly into the story that I wanted to talk about. So when these survivors from Atlantis, and they, from my understanding, they held in a specific gene related to the feline, and they essentially migrated over to this area of the world that housed a sphinx. And the sphinx, supposedly the original one anyways, it was very old, older than Atlantis perhaps, and it marked the outside of the Atlantean Empire. And when they arrived there, there was this energy, and the ones who, of the survivors that could connect with it more, were the feminine, and the feminine in this case, perhaps female. And that they ended up, because of their connection with this source of information, they ended up, or they turned into the leaders of that civilization. And yet, through that, controversy of men and women and feminine and masculine, and, those who have and those who have not, they covenanted that power. And eventually they rose into an area or into a ownership of that space, in which once again, that ebb and flow of the masculine and the feminine turned into an outright battle between the feminine and the masculine. And at least that's how I understood the story to be, that the ones who did not have that connection, and the ones who did not have, that inner knowing and knowledge, most of them were male or masculine, and that they rose up, and there was once again a battle. And this was supposedly, as I understand it, pre-Egyptian. And this essentially set us back. And then when I say us, I mean, the planet, into a state of darkness once again, because there's always seemed to have been a battle between the masculine and the feminine. And as I said, not just the sexes, but the actual energies themselves, allowing one energy to be more so dominant than the other. Here comes another train. This is awesome. Now the train is gonna go the opposite way, but that's perfectly okay. That's, it's I'm so grateful for this opportunity to sit in this vacant well, there was that one person who walked through the frame, but nonetheless, we are going to witness this train, and I'm going to just sit here and, do no thing. Welcome back again. Yes, that was some beautiful graffiti on there and definitely wonderful messaging overall. In a sense, every type of graffiti or, advertisement or even, you know, message falling from the sky or those airplanes that fly and they're able to put the words in the sky, in a sense, they're all a form of propaganda. And, it definitely changes your understanding of, how we receive information. Even with that train going by, there were a lot of messages, not just of people's names, but also, as you noticed, there was that, message that says Jesus saves. And, there's a different and a considerably wide variation of how we could even perceive that message. But yet, all of that artwork, especially that pink one halfway through, the light bulb that I saw, all the little, there was what I saw as a word keg, which is KAG. I kind of saw that in the imagery as well. And there was a lot of different, unique colors and creative contributions to our world because that train would have looked completely different if it had not had all of that creative inspiration tagged to it. So coming back to what I was saying, so that battle between femininity and masculinity has been something that appears to have continually, ebbed and flowed, rised and fall. And if you can imagine, for example, a sine curve or a tangent curve, like in the sciences or the math that we learn and we learn about how there's like an up and down and you put that curve in the middle of the axis of 0, and then you just keep going up and down, so it goes up as high as it can go, and it goes down as high as it can go, and it keeps going past that 0. that zero of neutrality. And that's kind of how I see when we look back into history beyond what we've been told is history, when we go back to different histories, as I was mentioning, pre Egyptian, but even going back further when there was a time of perhaps Atlantis that was being, at one point in time, at least towards the end of Atlantis, the fall or the flood of Atlantis, when there was more of a masculinity energy, more of a patriarchal control over the population, over the world, over, known society. And the beings there, they were more driven by perhaps that idea that technology, which by the way is somewhat seen as more patriarchal, that they're perhaps giving their power away to the patriarchal versus the femininity, who was perhaps more seen, or at least as I have come to understand it, as more of a Lemuria type of energy, where nature is by far more important and living in harmony with nature. But at the same time, perhaps even giving more way to nature, allowing things to come in and to push us over in these stories that I heard from Sarah. And her books are amazing. So I highly recommend, if you have the opportunity to perhaps, read through some of these, or you can actually download them on Audible. And there is on Audible this ability to even join up and download a book for free, I believe, or at least there was when I joined it. And so her first book, it talks about a time of Lemuria when the femininity was the one who was dominant within that society. And all you have to do is go back and look at our own stories about, Wonder Woman, and watch that movie Wonder Woman, and you'll see a world where the women dominated and or the feminine energy dominated. But yet at the same time, what you see within that, within the aspects of Wonder Woman, which I think is a wonderful balance of what we're talking about today, is there definitely appeared to be more of a balance of harmony between the aspects of femininity and masculinity when it came to the attributes, or the essentially the personification of who Wonder Woman was or perhaps is. That idea that, a woman can be in her sensuality, her sexuality, she can dress and, be stunning and beautiful, but yet at the same time, she can be a warrior for God, a warrior for her belief and for her own community. And so I feel that that's a wonderful example. The only thing that I would say that was perhaps imbalanced is, where's the men? Why are the men being casted off, and why are the men, not part of that civilization? Now, there are reasons and understandings that I've come to understand perhaps why, because once we often personify people of how we expect them to look. And of course, in a male dominated world, we're watching Wonder Woman and we're wanting to see very sexy women, and we're wanting to, highlight those aspects, especially in a world that is consumed by consumerism, to what depicts an ideal woman. So we can sell perhaps more push-up bras or something that, exasperates or personifies that ideal, or that ideals of what, a woman should look like. But yet the world that we live in, when it becomes more balanced, perhaps, what a beautiful woman can look like is how a beautiful woman feels like and how she sees herself in beauty. And that would be a great, attribute to a balancing. So if you looked at what I put on the thumbnail, it was a tarot card, or a representation perhaps from a tarot card, of the Empress and the Emperor. And for me, this has, been a unique visual when it became to the idea of what perhaps we are thriving towards, or what we're driving towards, more say, is to find that balance within ourselves individually, of our ability to express who we are as the Empress, who we are as the Emperor, finding that balance within us of our feminine energy as well as our masculine energy, and not perhaps, coping or capitulating to one or the other. And that's where I see our world shifting towards right now. I see men being more feminine, And there is definitely a drive and push, and there has been funding by organizations such as the ones that I took a picture of their building today, trying to drive the masculine into a more feminine state where, there would be a reduction of that testosterone to stand against that which was happening to us. Well, at the same time, there was a drive towards pushing the feminine to express more of their masculine energy, perhaps to an extreme where, that relationship and that connection within the family, because that nurturing energy, for example, comes from or is derived of that feminine energy. And so there, overall, in my opinion at least, has been a complete purposeful destruction of the foundational parts or aspects of our families, which were more derived from the feminine energy. The feminine energy are the ones that, supported the family, supported the community, that supported overall from a point of not having to stand up on top of a stage and claim victory and claim, I did all this. They did it from an aspect of, love and compassion and from behind the scenes. Not behind the scenes like, Lady and Macbeth and, well, Macbeth. They did it from a point of, I'm here when you need, and if you want to talk, I'll listen and you can share and I'll hear what you have to say and I will validate, you for what you require. And yet that definitely has empowered so many people to perhaps reach for stars that they were, or perhaps they were led to believe that were out of their range. And that part I feel has definitely been shrouded from us, or not shrouded from us because we've always known it was there. We've watched it in our movies, we've seen it happen, but yet that energy imbalance has been, in my opinion at least, purposely put there. But yet recognizing that every challenge and every trial that we endure, that we survive, that we, step out of like a phoenix rising from the flames, we give birth to something that's newer and greater, recognizing through our hindsight, perhaps, that the lessons that we have endured allow us to be a greater version of ourself. So this is by no means a, criticism to how our world has been. Because even as, for instance, men have taken on those feminine energies, they have expressed themselves through wearing nail polish, putting on a dress, and, wearing high heels. And there was this one lovely man who used to walk around the downtown area of my city, and he put these balls or balloons in his shirt to, give us the illusion that he was expressing himself in his divine energy, his divine feminine energy. And, I was grateful for that presence because it allowed to essentially shake me out of my belief of how I should or how I'm even perceived myself. As I've mentioned before, I myself choose to cross my legs the way that I cross them because it's actually better and, more easier for me to sit the way that I sit because on my back, I was told that I have a fusion on my lower two vertebrae. So this particular posture allows me to sit the way that I sit, and it's quite comfortable for me. And I've adapted to that. And yet I understand that as we move forward and as we more fall in enlightenment or we rise to alignment with our true forms, that however we choose to express ourselves will be ourselves. If we want to, use more color in the way we dress and we want to add nail polish on our nails as men, well, perhaps we have the opportunity to do that because it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to, a man or me have to go out and make love to another man. I can still be in my energy, in my fullness of who I want, authentic as me, and express myself in the energies that I choose each day to step forward and move with. But yet, our society would teach us that, gay men are gay, when actually the definition of the word gay is to be joyful and happy. And it's even used in a lot of these old Christmas carols. And we sing these songs not recognizing that perhaps our understanding of our language itself has been distorted. Actually, I got into this really oh, no, that's a car. I thought there was gonna be another train. Anyways, maybe that was a distraction because I don't need to go on with that. So, coming back to the balancing of the feminine and the masculine, I'm more so seeing that that perhaps is the path towards where we are going. And being a wayshower, being someone to say, hey, this is my experience, this is what I've noticed. And even in my own perception of myself, I see the masculine characteristics as well as I see the feminine characteristics of myself. And I've always looked to seek or to strive for balance within those energies. Allow my love and my compassion and the harmony and my love for nature and exploration and supporting those around me with their desires. I've always, and I don't say always in that I would equally express it in every moment of now because there were a lot of times where my compassion was, we'll say, manipulated for others' purposes. But within my heart of hearts, I've always felt the desire to support people in their creativity, in their desire to be what they choose to be, whether it was a painter or a photographer or someone who wanted to do a podcast about van life or someone who wanted to be an architect or someone who wanted to be a designer or go to a special place that really mattered to them. One of them was Liverpool, and this person truly had to and desired to venture to Liverpool because that was the narrative that we were told about the Beatles, that they had originally started there. And so I've always, yearned to support people in their desires. Even my mother, she always talked about traveling before she passed away. And I was able to manifest the or allow into form the opportunity to take her and backpack all the way down to San Diego, in which her and I walked across the border of Tijuana and Mexico, and we bussed all the way down to the peninsula of the Baja Peninsula. And these are adventures that she always wanted to experience. And so I was given the opportunity to allow and to help her, with that dream. And with others as well, always encourage that. And that definitely came from the feminine support. But yet at the same time, I was always looking to, lead myself. I balanced it with, my creativity, with creating my own production company and going out there and leading others and directing others as I became the director of one of them and the producer of both, to searching for, you know, my own creations to be fully utilized. And through this adventure, through this journey that I call my life, I've often found myself, ebbing and flowing between the two, and more so, over the last few years where I took on the challenge of parenting my son mostly by myself as a father and having to learn and relearn perhaps the feminine portions of parenting. Because within us all, I truly do believe that we can find balance and we can find the aspects of ourself that are both masculine and feminine. And perhaps that is what that whole image on my thumbnail is all about. And also a reading that I recently heard about bringing the Empress and the Emperor into full balance. That both of us, and I say the Emperor and the Empress, both of those energies within each of us, when they are balanced, that truly becomes the energy from which we can fully create with. And maybe that is what the alignment with God is, the source of all things, that it's the balance between the energies of masculinity and the energies of femininity when they are able to express in harmony with one another. That does not mean, of course, that, one reigns over the other. It means that both attributes, the personification of both of them, are in alignment with one another. And maybe, just maybe, that's when we are able to express our own co creative realities that we thrive within in balance and harmony. And maybe that's just when the wonderful pictures come up without heart, without hardship. That's when the wonderful opportunities, they just manifest in our reality. And maybe that's what we're all searching for. But most importantly, to get to where we're going and to have the outer world come into the state that we would prefer it to be, we would first look within and balance ourselves, release those traumas, those, situations of when, oh, that person laughed at me because I expressed my femininity, so I hid it away. Or, I was, and this is from a woman's perspective, I was very sexual at one point in time, and because of the way I dressed, and I wanted to express my sensuality and my sexuality, and my parents or someone did something to me, or I was perhaps raped because I decided to be, beautiful the way that I felt inside, and I wore that dress. And let those traumas go, let those expressions of who we are go. And, maybe just maybe when we release the traumas that limited our expression of the other energy, maybe just maybe that's when we truly align ourselves with who we are. And we no longer succumb to the expressions of, or the projections of, more importantly, those around us telling us how we should be, what we should dress and look like, how we should wear our hair, how we should, women have to wear a dress and men have to wear a suit. Maybe, just maybe, we can all dress how we truly feel internally. More so, as I've mentioned in the past, like the costume design of that show called The Mockingbird or The Hunger Games. Yeah, The Hunger Games, but not the original Hunger Games. When we get all back into, or when we see the people, how they dressed in the actual main place where, the higher level society, maybe that's more of a unique expression of the balance of masculine and femininity. And I truly do look forward to living in a world where I can express myself the way that I would choose with the dress that I would choose. And I say dress as in dress myself, not necessarily, a skirt or something, but that we can live in a world where it's kind of similar to that game. What's that game called? Saints Row. Yeah, Saints Row 3 specifically, where we have the ability to modify our avatar, our character in flashing colored shoes and, the different prints and the different creative expressions of the clothing, not having to worry about, copyrights and all that lovely stuff. If we want to have a Pikachu on our shirt, we can just have a Pikachu on our shirt, and we can creatively create and design those things ourselves, allowing perhaps more of this idea of AI and the integration of AI as a tool to essentially allow us to bring in that creative expression and have our hair pink if we want it pink, and the next day if we want it blue, and the next day we're back to whatever color it is that we would choose to express. So lots to think about, lots that I've thought about. And thank you so much for, making it through those trains. Sometimes when distortions or interruptions come, we can often be distracted and, you know, lose that flow that we're within, but you didn't. You stayed here to the end. You made it to the end. You did it for whatever reason why. I did it for whatever reason why. And yeah, I'm going to wrap it up right there. Thank you so much. Definitely reflect and comment and visit me on Patreon. Have a wonderful day and thank you so much.